Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, chapter 3.
Good to go.
All right. God bless you in the name of Jesus Christ. This is Steve. We're in Otis Orchards, Washington. It's the 6th of November, 2022. Today, just because of some of the things going around, we're going to talk about politics. We listened to something last week that was very interesting and educational about our country, the United States of America, and how politics and citizenship and everything got set up. And today we're going to look at it more from a biblical point of view, because politics or people, organized bodies of people, have always been with us and probably always will be. And believers get involved. And a lot of times God is involved with those believers, and there are good outcomes a lot of times. So we're going to look at that from that point of view. But we're going to start in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And this is a very familiar section of scripture, but it has its importance to us today. Verse 1 of chapter 3, Ecclesiastes: to everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven. Dr. Bullinger in his companion Bible just says that there's an appointed time to everything. And I don't think he meant it in a fatalistic way, like this is going to happen no matter what, but things just happen in their time. In their time, they happen. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. There is a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. We all are very familiar with this. There's a time for everything. And this week it's time to vote. We'll look at the book of Esther. And I thought of all the books in the Bible, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms. Of all the books in the Bible that have a political message, Esther would be the one. Most of the people that we know in the Bible had to deal with some kind of politics or another. Think about Jesus Christ and King Herod. I mean, Herod was after him, and he didn't even know who he was, so he sent army guys to kill all the 2-year-old boys. Think of the times that Jesus spent in Jerusalem and in country with the Roman occupation. The Romans didn't seem to give him much trouble. It was the Pharisees that had the Romans bother him. Think about Paul the Apostle. Did he have any trouble with politics? You know, he got in trouble all the time and eventually went to Rome to talk to Caesar about Jesus Christ. So, and Peter, of course, he ran into trouble with the magistrates and the politics of his time. So that kind of stuff is woven throughout God's word. Not unusual. There's political stuff always. The book of Esther is fascinating. We'll start in chapter 1, and we're just going to read. Verse 1, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 120 provinces. That in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 104 days. It's a big, big deal. This is the Persian and the Mede Empire. We've talked about that. And the empire was from India all the way to North Africa. And this is what those guys did back in the day. They were wealthy and powerful, and they wanted everybody to see it. So they showed it off. Verse 5, when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen, purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. Pretty fancy. They gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belongs to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded these fellows here, they were chamberlains, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So he was showing off all his stuff, and one of the stuffs he had was his wife, the queen. But the queen refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very mad, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And next unto him was these people, 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, which sat first in the kingdom, which is interesting. You didn't just walk into the king. These guys worked with him every day, so they saw his face. But from the king came orders and commandments, and they would go down the ranks. And it'd be interesting. You could be a citizen and never see the king. It was all his henchmen. 15, what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she has not performed the commandment of the king by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought before him, but she didn't come. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, there shall arise too much contempt and wrath. It'll be a lady riot. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that's better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it's great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters unto all the king's provinces, and to every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. We've talked several times about what the world looked like at this time. This is around 500 BC. When these empires were built, they were made of all kinds of different kingdoms, Israel, Judah being one of them. And who, as the people were conquered, those that weren't killed, a lot of them were hauled off as slaves and put in other cities to populate and work in other places. And all their languages and all their customs remained the same wherever they left. So they had to send out this thing in lots of different languages to lots of different places. Chapter 2, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women unto the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given him. And let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The thing pleased the king, and he did so. Who wouldn't agree to that? Wouldn't that be fun? It's like all the pretty girls and the whole, they're going to have a beauty pageant. They're going to stand before the king, and I'm going to pick one. Wow. You gotta love some of these old customs. Now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew. Name was Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. He was one of the captured people, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away when Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. There's your dates, and there's your activity. That's where he came from. He was one of those taken out. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. For she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. What happened to mom and dad? In the Nebuchadnezzar takeover, they probably fell to the sword or something. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him. She obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Now, as you know, God is never mentioned in this book, but look at that. Does it kind of remind you of Joseph a little bit? Other people that God was kind of watching and taking care of. She's cute, she's a young virgin person, and yet the dude, Chamberlain, they call him here, what we call a eunuch, head of the city, he liked her. Gave her special treatment and special people to take care of her, put her in a special place. So even though God is not mentioned, you kind of see there is a time for everything. And God at this time had his people in the right place. Verse 10, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how she did and what became of her. Now, when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. I don't understand that. Maybe you have some insight in that. But what? You bathe in special smelly stuff for 6 months? I mean, your body would smell wonderful. Your breath would smell wonderful. I mean, inside 12 months of purifying. That's just ancient stuff. We don't do that we don't do that at all. But isn't that interesting? She smelled like and make sure they're virgins and be as pretty as you could be and as nice smelling as you could be. Crazy. 13, then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. I don't even want to think about that. I mean, what are you going to I'm going to take a boa constrictor and I'm going to take a whip. I got to make a good, what's the show? The Bachelor. Got to make a good first impression. Makes you think, doesn't it? In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned unto the second house of the women to the custody of Shagaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she was called by name. So you got a first impression. That was it. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go into the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. Smart, right? What's the king like? His favorite color is red. Give me a red dress. She was smart. And there again, God is not mentioned, but Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces, gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she had brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king. They were going to assassinate the king. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So good for Mordecai and Esther. God is not mentioned, yet you see things working here. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, Why transgressed thou the king's commandment? It came to pass, when they spoke daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. This is, you can put a finger here or your marker and go to 1 Samuel 15. Why this came up, and I know you know this, but we'll look at it again. 1 Samuel 15, when this guy Haman found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided to kill him. How come? And all the people of Mordecai. The reason why is they go back a long ways. In 1 Samuel 15, this is the days of Samuel and Saul. Verse 2 of 1 Samuel 15. Thus said the Lord of hosts, remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, and a sheep and camel and ass. So when Moses was leading the folks out of Egypt, the Amalekites withstood him, and they started a war with them. Didn't let them through. Skip over to verse 8. So Saul was charged with wiping out the Amalekites, Saul the king. Saul goes in there. He took, verse 7, Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah unto you come to Shur, that is over against Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword, but he spared Agag. Go to verse 32. The man of God Samuel says, bring ye hither to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites, after he confronted Saul. You remember that. And Agag came unto him delicately. And Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. Samuel said, as thy sword has made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Some texts read, had him chopped up. maybe not do it himself. So back to Esther. Why did he hate the Jews? Because of their past and their conflict. So when he found out that's who he was, Haman, who was now a big political person, started planning to destroy him. Verse 7 of chapter 3, right? Does somebody feel like reading? Mark? Yeah, please. I'm losing my voice.
Yeah. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman, from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it unto the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment. And the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed.
So there you have, he snuck in a bad policy, and it became the law. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And it isn't until somebody stands up against it that the policy's changed. But there again, God's involved. Are you happy to keep reading?
I'll read another chapter.
Okay.
When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the king exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, and to take away the sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasurers for the Jews, to destroy them. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, and make supplication unto him, and to make requests before him for her people. And Hatach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hatach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter. that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And it was told to Mordecai, Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink these 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
Cool. I love that. Thanks, Mark. In verse 14, Mordecai seems to be saying, if you can't help us, God will figure it out someday, but probably not in our lifetime. That kind of. Anybody else feel like reading? Amy, go.
Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel, and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. The king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them. And I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends, and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, Moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife, and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. And go thou and merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made.
Slimy guy. Are you happy reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like this.
Yeah, me too.
On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of the Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, There is nothing done for him. And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house, to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, To the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. Let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man with all whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback to the street of the city, and proclaim before him. Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback to the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And Mordecai came again to King Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared.
Talk about timing, huh?
Wow.
But God's not involved. You know? Yeah. Anybody else want to read? Thanks, Iggy. I will power through it then. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to half of the kingdom. Which that was a pretty common thing they used to say. They said it in Jesus' time too. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden unto the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed wherein Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Hey, behold now, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stands at the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him on it. So they hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Pretty crazy. You know, in the East, they laid on big pillows to eat and to drink wine. So Haman was caught red-handed in the middle of a dirty deal. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jew's enemy unto Esther the queen. Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him what he was unto her. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Then Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he had laid his hands upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, the deputies, rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces. Unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. They didn't have cell phones, but I could just see this in my all these scribes sitting there, all the languages of 127 provinces. Write this down, Mordecai. All translations, and then sealing them in the wax or whatever. Get going. I mean, that's a long ride on a camel all the way to India. And off they went. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and provinces that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province, in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. How about that? Good witness, huh? Got some converts. Yeah, well, we'll read it. Now in the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them, the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king to lay hold on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, lieutenants, deputies, officers, helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. These folks. Verse 10. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, and on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, and 10 sons of Haman, and what have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition? It shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? It shall be done. Then said Esther, if it please the king, that it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow, like they did today. And let Haman's sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it to be done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews were in Shushan, gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand. And the rest of them did the same thing. We'll skip over to verse 25. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all which has joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fall, that they should keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to these appointed times every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city, and that these days of Purim should not fall from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. And Esther and Mordecai did very well. Purim, this is the modern day Jewish stuff. The jolly festival of Purim is celebrated every year on the 14th of the Hebrew month Adar. This year it'll be March 6th and 7th. It commemorates the salvation of the Jewish people in ancient Persia from Haman's plot to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. Purim is a Persian word. It means lots, for throwing lots. That's where they get that. And we're supposed to pronounce it correctly. In the Eastern tradition, it's called Purim. Among Westerners, it's often called Purim. Some Central European communities even call it Purim. Today, if you say Purim in English, you have told everybody you don't know what you're talking about. So every year, the events that Esther and Mordecai oversee are written on a scroll. They're to be read every year on Purim. The scroll, called the Megillah, the Book of Esther, was one of the final books to be canonized in the Tanakh. A genuine Megillah must be written by a scribe on parchment, a painstaking process that takes several days or weeks to complete. So they still do this every year. Also, they spin graggers. This is a noisemaker. It's used to drown out Haman's name during reading of the Megillah. Since every word must be heard clearly, the reader repeats the name after the racket has died down. Although traditionally made of wood, graggers can be made of tin, plastic, or anything else. In a pinch, pounding on the table, stamping one's feet, or shaking one's keys will suffice. So they have to write out the story of Esther, and when they read it, whenever Haman's name comes up, they blot it out. And then when everybody dies down, they say the name anyway. Jewish people. The sages of the Talmud assert that a person is obliged to drink on Purim until he does not know the difference between blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman. Obviously, this does not apply to anyone who may become ill or act inappropriately when intoxicated. Yeah. So there's a fast before Purim, and then next day you get smashed. And because God is never named in the book, their treats have secret centers, like cookies. There's this cookie called a pastry filled with poppy seeds and meat-filled kriplach. They're cooked and served with chicken soup. The seeds recall Esther's vegetarian diet in the royal palace where she secretly kept kosher. Anyway, these cookies have secret centers because God was obviously involved in the whole story, but you never heard his name. So they have secrets. You dress up on Purim, wear masks, or otherwise make themselves look somewhat unusual. And it's hilarious. So every year, they still celebrate this. This year, it's March 6th and 7th. And it's interesting. They say that Stalin the Russian dude, was stopped on Purim. In the early 50s, Stalin, the ruthless butcher of millions of innocent people, had bloody plans for dealing with the Jewish problem in the USSR. Just as things were reaching a crisis point in 1953, he suddenly fell ill and died on Purim. And also in 91, Saddam Hussein defiantly invaded nearby Kuwait. As pressure ramped up from the international community, his army began firing Scud missiles into Israel. The rabbi, so-and-so, repeatedly assured the people of Israel they would be protected. After the U.S.-led forces attacked Iraq, they were quickly victorious, and the hostilities ended on Purim. So, for what it's worth. Love the story of Esther because look at that political mishmash and how it was stacked against God's people. And yet, look how God turned it. And it was, again, it was one bad guy, Haman, who had bad policy and made it law. One good guy with a stepdaughter. One person made all those changes. They're pretty cool, huh? So, thanks. Father, thank you for the day, and thank you for this wonderful record and this account of believers who believed and stood in the gap in tough times and made great victories. We're thankful for that record, that account, and for our lives, wherever we are, that we stand and help also. Thanks for a day and a great week coming up, that we're all ready for our winter time. Thanks for being so kind to us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen.